my first introduction to jazz was big band. So that's what exposed me to all the great soloists. And then as I got more comfortable with the genre, I started to be more drawn to the smaller groups. And but my first work was with Woody Herman, which was one of the classic big bands of all time. And he was a case where he was a very progressive thinker, and he let the soloists stretch out quite a bit. So it lent itself more to being a small group player, actually, playing with that band. So I started delving in more deeply at that point. And when I started my own band in New York, I filled it with a lot of soloists, and we played, long solos as if it was a small group. So it wasn't that much of a stretch to, when I started the small group, to kind of follow a similar format.
And how did you choose the instrument? As I can see, there are few trombones and lots of woodwinds and brass, and also few trombone soloists.
Yeah, well, there's a very steep learning curve on the instrument, and many times playing jazz on the trombone can be a bit of a daunting task for some people. And because when you first start playing, the technical limitations are greater in many cases. So, but I was drawn to the instrument at age 9. I just liked the way it looked. And I was always a tall kid, and I think I was maybe pushed in that direction. So I was one of the few kids that could reach the long positions on the trombone. But I liked the look of it. I liked that it was kind of different than everything else. And at that time, you could still hear trombone on the radio and television fairly frequently. So it wasn't that odd of a choice. But to pursue jazz, I had an uncle who gave me some Tommy Dorsey records when I was in junior high school, and got interested in big band and jazz playing that way.
Are there more trombonists today or less than it used to be because there are less big bands?
Well, I think there's more. I think there's probably the same amount of players, but there's more players that are drawn to improvisation and small groups because of the limited number of big bands out there.
Who are the greatest trombones players that you feel as influential on you?
My first big influence was a trombonist named Irby Green, who he played in the big bands in the 50s, played with Woody Herman, and he moved to New York and had a fantastic career, still playing today. But he was one of these guys that could do everything. He could, he had a beautiful sound, he had great technique. He could play jazz, he could play ballads, he could play lead in a big band. He did so many different things, and that led me to believe I needed to be able to do a lot of different things too. And I think because he was that initial influence, I pursued a lot of different things from the onset, and it gave me a lot more, I guess, perspective on all the different ways you can play. After Irby, I started taking some jazz lessons when I was in high school, and I got exposed to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and through them I was introduced to J.J. Johnson's playing. And then people like Bill Watrous and Carl Fontana was a huge influence, as well as Frank Rossellino and Slide Hampton are probably my main influences. I'm also a fan of a German trombonist that we just recently lost, Albert Mangelsdorf, very fine player.
to your years as not a leader but a partner in a Woody Herman big band, how do you get a solo? I always ask myself whether you have to fight for a solo. Is it known before the concert that you'll have a solo? Does he point you at a certain time freely and say, now you?
Well, his band was kind of unique because Woody was not a writer or a composer, arranger or anything. So he had this catalog of music, this book of music that we traveled with that was about this thick. And when you get hired for the band, you get hired basically for a specific chair and a specific sound as a soloist. So you're hired knowing that you're going to be plugged in to certain tunes that you're going to play a solo on. So for me, it was just doing my homework, knowing what I was going to play. And the first night, Woody came up to me and gave me a couple suggestions, and then after that, everything was whatever I wanted to play.
Since you know what solo you will have, do you prepare yourself for it, or do you just go up, you know?
It's a little different with a big band than a small group, because with a big band, you have this framework of the arrangement and a set number of measures you're playing the solo, sometimes very short, sometimes longer, but you're always kind of having to deal with the jazz orchestra around you with background figures and things like that. So you don't plan your solo, but you kind of have an idea of what the contour of it's going to be and where you have to end up, because the band's going to come in and where the band leaves you off has a certain tone or mood to it. So you have certain restrictions. But other than that, the goal of a jazz musician is to start kind of free of anything and develop ideas differently each time you play. So I try to do that, regardless of the situation.
I always say that, let's say, the young musicians today don't have this kind of school. I think that big bands were excellent school. You play with people, and you have to be very responsible, and you have to make your solo say something, be built in a way. And these people created, you know, the first one created jazz and bebop, and this kind of school vanished. So young musicians, I see them many times, starting a solo, they know it'll be long, so if it starts not so good, well, I have some more, let's say, 5 minutes, something will happen.
Yeah.
Do you consider big bands as a good school?
Playing with a big band was a really great experience, just for the reasons that I talked about earlier, is you have these restrictions, and you have to somehow make what you do fit within the context of this. So it teaches you to be very organized about your thoughts. So when I play small group now, it feels easy to me because there's a lot more time and there's a lot more freedom. So working within that confined system really kind of forces you to really think about how you play, how you want to play, and in a short period of time, how to get your sound or your ideas or your thoughts to the listener. And yes, there's very few bands like that out there now. And in addition to jazz playing, it just helps your general musicianship. You're playing with other musicians. You have to blend. You have to play in tune. You have to communicate, work as a unit. A lot of those things are kind of lost when you play a small group. You don't have all those things to deal with. And for me, it was a great education. I've improved tenfold in the time I was on the road.
if you have to choose a new young musician for a small group, and you have two of them, both are good, and one say, I was working in a big band, and the other says, I wasn't, would you prefer to try the first one?
To be honest, I wouldn't want to have any preconceived ideas. I just want, if I was to choose a new player, I would listen to them both carefully and see how they dealt with certain situations. And if those situations that I have in my groups present themselves, how they deal with those, so I can see if they can adapt to that.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone in the band. Thank you.